Before we get into today's topic, I want to take a minute to share with you why this space even exists. I didn't really do an introduction last time, so I guess I'll start today. My name is Melissa, and for a long time, I didn't know where faith was supposed to live in real life. I believed in God, and I guess I loved Him. I wouldn't really say that I did then. And that's only because I didn't know Him. But I didn't understand how faith was supposed to fit inside a human body, especially one that gets tired and, has to show up for marriage and motherhood and work and the responsibility and, just everything that life throws at you while still trying to grow spiritually. A lot of faith spaces that I had found, they would talk about belief and obedience or discipline, but I never found one that talked about how faith lands in our nervous system or what it looks like to follow God when you're overwhelmed and burnt out or just unsure, especially someone like me who would go through waves of those feelings. I would say that I had a low-grade depression and just chronic fear-based response and anxiety that would come in a lot of waves. And so this podcast isn't about having everything figured out. This is just about learning how to stay with God and with yourself and with life. And my hope is that this can just become a slower space and one that can feel grounding instead of pressuring. So today I want to start with something that completely changed how I understand guidance and clarity and even what faith feels like in my body. This is something that I shared on my social media, but I guess I could expand it on here. I don't actually think that I learned how to hear God. I think that my brain just finally got quiet enough to notice Him. And I know that it might sound a little strange because we are usually taught that hearing God is just something that you have to practice and unlock and just kind of figure out spiritually. But that's not how this started for me. I didn't sit down and decide to rewire my brain so that I can hear God better. What I did was a lot more simple. And honestly, it was a lot messier. I started bringing my inner world into the light. I was really struggling with my thoughts, my intrusive thoughts, my negativity, my self-doubt. I got to a point where it got pretty bad. And so I decided to bring the thoughts that I didn't want to admit, the thoughts that I felt embarrassed by, and the intrusive thoughts that just made me question myself, but also my trauma responses that I kept trying to override with faith. And so instead of just letting all of that run quietly in the background like I had been doing for many years, even after modern therapy, I started bringing it to God as it was. Very unfiltered, not cleaned up, not spiritualized in any way. Realize it at the time, but that shift changed everything. And growing up, I always thought that God would just show me how life was supposed to go by giving me information. I thought that I would receive a plan and a clear picture of what would be coming next and just some kind of certainty. And I assumed that if I prayed the right way or I stayed close enough to Him, that clarity would just drop in. But that, unfortunately, is not usually how God works. I can't really speak for everybody, but for myself, that's what I've learned. But what I also learned is that slowly, God doesn't usually reveal the future by giving us more information. He reveals it by changing how we see. What I've learned very slowly is that God doesn't usually reveal the future by giving us more information. He reveals it by changing how we see. And so instead of handing us a map, God will invite you closer. And as we come closer, our perception shifts. What He gives us, it's not directions. It is alignment. That is something that I've learned. And that distinction really matters more than I realized at the time. And that distinction really matters more than what I realized at the time, because I had to learn that clarity doesn't come before safety. It came after it. When your nervous system is overwhelmed, your brain isn't designed to discern purpose or direction. It is designed to scan for threat. So when Scripture talks about God giving peace and leading or guiding, that is functional. It's not abstract. The peace is going to quiet the internal noise that's within you. And then the sense of urgency and you feeling on edge just starts to slowly soften. And the options that were very loud just end up losing their grip little by little. And then you get discernment. And it's not forced. It's very gradual. That is why clarity usually shows up after you surrender. It's not when you strive for it. That's how it happened to me. And it's still happening in real time. This is not me saying that I'm fixed or I'm cured. As I am experiencing all of this, I had just decided to share my journey in real time, but I'm still going through this journey. In the Bible, it says, "Be still and know." And I can relate to that a lot because the stillness comes first. The knowing comes second. I did not understand that for a long time. But when I experienced it, I couldn't unsee it, even though it would come in waves. From a neuroscience perspective, none of this is mystical. This is just how our brain works. When you have a thought that stays automatic and unexamined, and you don't check yourself, it will stay very fast and powerful because your neural pathways, they get reinforced through repetition and emotional charge. Your brain loves efficiency, even if that pattern is hurting you. Fear loops, trauma responses, your negative self-talk, all of that. But when you actually slow down your thoughts and you look at it, instead of suppressing it or arguing with it, something changes. You eventually move from reactive processing to reflective processing. And that shift, it will activate your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that is responsible for discernment and regulation and choice. And at the same time, it quiets the amygdala, which is the alarm system that keeps your body in threat mode. And so what happened was, every time I brought my thoughts into the light, instead of letting it just run me, I unintentionally started weakening an old pathway and strengthening a new one. Every single time, I am talking consistently. It was not perfect. Every time I caught myself having a bad thought, I would either say it out loud, acknowledge it to God, or acknowledge it in my head. That is neuroplasticity in real time. This is where scripture and biology line up so perfectly. It's so beautiful. God's design is so intentional. that when I started to understand all of this, it was just like fireworks that were going off in my head. When the Bible talks about renewing the mind, it's not talking about modifying your behavior. It is talking about internal restructuring. You have to think differently, not act better, not feel better. I mean, yes, technically you should. You absolutely should. But you have to think differently, and that is the hardest thing that you are doing, because you are essentially arguing with your thoughts. Thought patterns, they shape nervous system states, and nervous system states shape your perception. That is why hearing God was not the starting point for me. It was a byproduct. It wasn't like I gained a spiritual superpower. I didn't unlock anything special. All I did was just quiet the noise. And this matters because if you are dealing with trauma, that is going to keep your nervous system very loud. The fear that is in your brain, it's going to keep scanning. And your intrusive thoughts are just going to mess up your attention. And when your brain is stuck in survival mode, your clarity is biologically not available because your system is just too busy protecting you to even notice the little things that God does. Because when you hear God, you start to understand that God is not loud. It's not like when you can finally hear him, there's this loud external voice. It is not like that. It is very subtle. I realized that I was experiencing neurological overload, and I stopped shaming my thoughts. And listen, I'm still working on this. It's not, like I said, this all comes in waves. But I learned that when I stopped shaming my thoughts and I stopped trying to outpray them, and I brought them into honesty and safety with God, my nervous system just slowly came out of that threat mode. And the clarity then showed up. And one of the ways that God started showing me how good life can be was not by laying everything out in advance. It was through contrast. It was through very small moments. It was not answers. It was experiences. I started to get moments of peace in seasons that should have felt chaotic. And I started to receive more opportunities that didn't require me to override my values. And the alignment that I felt, it didn't have anxiety attached to it. Those were the reference points, and they taught my body just basically something that my mind couldn't argue me into believing. That is what alignment feels like. And when your nervous system has felt that, it is much harder to ignore when something is off. And so when I go through those waves, I can now easily is a strong word, but I have an easier time picking myself back up from it, because the doubt, it gets just more loose and it's not matching my reality as much as it was anymore. God did not design us to be regulated all the time, because if that were the case, we would not need him as our anchor. That's the design. That is how he made us. And one of the most practical things that I've learned is that the aligned opportunities, they feel a lot different than the forced ones. It was just more momentum and not panic. You get expansion in your life, but you don't lose yourself in the process. And you still have to grow. You still have to go through all of these hard moments, and it stretches you and it pulls you really hard, but it doesn't break you. It should not break you. And that difference really matters, because once you get mental clutter that reduces your doubt, it's replaced with evidence. The provision just shows up very quietly, and you start getting doors that open, and the blessings that come in your life, they happen, and you don't always feel so burnt out like you used to anymore. And you start to notice all of these patterns and things that start happening. And it's, I think, one of my favorite ways to express what's been happening to me is that I start to notice all of these experiences that are too personal to be coincidences. So over time, your brain just ends up learning all this new information. That is neurological safety that is being established. You know, God doesn't promise us a plan. I don't know what my 5-year plan is going to look like, but the Bible and God, Jesus, promise us a lamp for our feet and just enough light for the next step that has to be faithful. So now, how do you recognize, though, when God is leading? Because that is something that I had a hard time understanding. I had a hard time being able to pick apart my thoughts and understanding, is this God or is this my anxiety? The way that you know that it's God is when your body can settle instead of it feeling tight. You don't feel the need to convince everyone. It feels inviting. It does not feel pressured. And even though our fears and our doubts and our worries can fluctuate, your peace is still there. And how good it can get, it's not about an easy life. It's just about being coherent. When your faith and your body and your values and your direction, they just all stop fighting each other. Now, before I end this podcast, I do want to share something that I've been thinking about, and I genuinely would like to get your input. I shared about this on my TikTok, but I want to bring this on here. You know, lately I've felt a pull to start doing Bible studies live on YouTube. I've been getting a lot of people asking for some type of Bible study, and honestly, I didn't have anything. I started sharing everything with you guys, you know, as I'm learning and as I'm growing. And so, you know, people are asking me for all these things, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't have anything. And so I would like to start a Bible study live on YouTube, where we start from the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, and we just slowly walk through scripture together, one chapter at a time, maybe 2 if it makes sense. I don't want this to be rushed. The idea would not be for me to teach in a formal way. It would be more like reading together and pausing and talking through what stands out and just unpacking the symbolism and the context. And I'd like to read to you guys all my notes and just everything I have, and figuring out how this can connect to real life today. And so I would have my notes and just share with you everything that I've learned, and I would really want this to feel conversational and open. Curious, and, you know, a space where questions are welcome and tangents are allowed, and we are learning together instead of just consuming content. And ideally, I would like to do this at the same time each day, so it's easy to build into your routine. I posted this on TikTok, and I asked if you guys could respond and let me know what time would work for you. What time zone specifically are you in? I am in Eastern time zone. And so for me, sometime after 4 p.m. would work great. There is no pressure to show up every day. This isn't about obligation. YouTube allows you to save and record the lives, so you can watch this later if you miss one. I just feel like there's so much depth here, and I would really want to create a space where we are all connecting and learning together. And, you know, I've talked about how I have been in the isolation season for many years now of my life. And gosh, it's been so many years. And for the first time, I feel pulled to do this because I think that this could start a community. I would love to have a online virtual community, and who knows where this will take us, but I would love to connect and learn together. And so tell me honestly if this is something that you'd want to be a part of. I guess comment on here. If so, what days and times work best for you. And to close this off, here is what I want to leave you with. God shows you how good it can get by teaching your nervous system what alignment feels like, so that you stop mistaking your anxiety for calling and pressure for purpose. And when you felt that alignment, you don't have to be convinced anymore. You just learn how to follow it. If you made it to the end, thank you for being here and for listening slowly. If this resonated with you, I would love for you to follow the podcast, share it with someone who might need it, leave a review. I don't know if you can do that. So maybe this space can reach more people. Maybe there is someone out there that you know that is dealing with the same thing. Share it to someone that you love. This isn't about rushing your transformation. It's just about learning how to stay. I'll see you next time.